At our engagement dinner, her mom called me a gold digger, and my girlfriend laughed. So I quietly stood up and revealed what none of them knew about the ring, the venue, and the entire bill. Today's story isn't just about betrayal at a dinner table. It's about dignity, power, and what happens when the person they mocked stands up and walks away. At his own engagement dinner, her mother called him a gold digger, and his fiancée laughed. But before dessert was served, he'd already changed the narrative in a way they never saw coming. Stay tuned, because what he did next silenced the entire room. I remember the exact moment I decided to propose to Clara. It wasn't during some grand, romantic weekend or after a passionate kiss beneath city lights. It was on a lazy Sunday morning, watching her sip coffee in my hoodie, humming off-key to a song she didn't even know the lyrics to. In that moment, I saw the woman I wanted to grow old with. And so, quietly and carefully, I began planning. I didn't tell anyone, not even my best friend. I wanted every part of the proposal. And the dinner that followed to be a surprise that echoed how deeply I valued her. The ring wasn't store-bought. I reached out to a private jeweler I met years ago during a freelance design gig. I described Clara in detail, graceful, elegant, yet with a quiet fire beneath her soft voice. He helped me craft a custom piece, vintage rose gold, entwined with a thin braid of emeralds and a single teardrop diamond at the center. It cost 3 months' salary, and I drained my savings to cover it. But I didn't flinch. Love, I thought, should be matched with sacrifice. No corners cut. No price too high when you know she's the one. The next challenge was the engagement dinner. Clara's parents were old money, and I knew the venue had to match their tastes. So I booked one of the most exclusive rooftop restaurants in the city, the Altair. Reservations had to be made months in advance, and I paid the deposit out of pocket. I arranged a private dining area, a live cellist, personalized menus, and even handpicked the wine. I coordinated with the chef to include dishes her mother had mentioned enjoying during a casual brunch. I wanted everything to reflect thoughtfulness, not showmanship, just quiet excellence. I didn't tell Clara how much I spent. Not because I was hiding it, but because I wanted the focus to be on the moment, not the money. In truth, I didn't think it mattered. We talked about building a life together, about keeping things private, intimate, sincere. So I assumed we were aligned. But a few things had started bothering me lately, little comments from her about finally making it, about me being lucky to be with someone like her. I brushed them off at first, thinking they were jokes, nervous quips maybe. But deep down, a small worry took root. When I asked Clara to invite her family to the dinner, she seemed unusually excited. Almost as if this was more about them seeing something than us celebrating something. Still, I stayed focused. I bought a new suit, got my shoes shined, and even asked the hostess to print her family name in gold foil on the dinner menus. I didn't just want to impress them. I wanted to show them that, despite not having the pedigree they expected, I had taste, intention, and above all, respect for the woman I was about to propose to. The night before the dinner, I couldn't sleep. Not from nerves about proposing. That part one was sure of. It was her family. I'd only met them once before, and the energy had been icy. Her mother had glanced at my car like it was an eyesore, and her father had offered me a handshake so limp I wondered if it was a test. Still, Clara told me not to overthink it. They're just protective, she said. They'll come around once they see how much you love me. I wanted to believe her. I had to believe her. After all, she was the one I chose. By 6:45 p.m. the next evening, everything was set. The venue looked breathtaking. The table was laid with white orchids and flickering candles. Soft music played from the far corner, and a light breeze stirred the linen drapes around the balcony. Clara arrived first, stunning in a navy silk gown I hadn't seen before. She looked radiant, and for a moment, all my fears melted. She kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "You really went all out." I smiled. I wanted to tell her everything I had done for this night, but something about her tone made me pause. Then her family arrived. Her mother walked in like she owned the skyline. Tailored cream coat, flawless makeup, and a sharpness in her eyes that scanned the room before landing on me. No smile, just a nod, as if she were acknowledging the presence of a service staff member rather than her daughter's fiancé. Her father followed a step behind, phone still in hand, barely glancing up. He muttered a brief evening, like he was entering a boardroom instead of his daughter's engagement celebration. Behind them came Clara's younger brother, Nolan, who didn't bother hiding his smirk. I stood up, offering a warm hand to each of them. Her mother ignored it entirely. "Nice setup," she said, circling the table like a critic judging an exhibit. "A little flashy, don't you think?" She had the candle arrangements and the embossed menus before sitting. Her voice wasn't loud, but loud enough for the comment to sting. Clara gave a short laugh, a kind of half-hearted giggle that didn't come with any defense. I looked at her, waiting for a word, any word, but she just sipped her wine. Maybe she was nervous. Maybe this was just her way of coping. I told myself not to overthink it. Not yet. Dinner began with champagne, and I tried to guide the conversation gently. I asked about her father's consulting work, complimented her mother's charity events I'd read about, and even tried to bond with Nolan over a shared interest in cycling, though he seemed more interested in texting than talking. Every compliment I gave was met with indifference, every attempt at small talk rerouted or ignored. It was like I didn't belong there, and they wanted me to feel it. And still Clara said nothing. Not a word to redirect the tone, not a glance to ease my growing discomfort. Then came the salad course, and with it, a shift. Her mother leaned in slightly and said, "So, tell me again, what exactly do you do?" I explained my freelance marketing business, the clients I worked with, the contracts I'd landed. I even mentioned a recent award I'd won for a campaign. She listened with a glassy expression, then smiled without warmth and said, "So, no real job security then?" Clara chuckled. I turned to her, waiting for her to object, but she just raised her glass as if nothing had been said. My chest tightened. The room felt smaller. I tried to refocus. "What matters most to me," I said, "is building a future together, one based on trust and shared dreams." I looked at Clara as I said it, hoping she'd see that this night was about us, not them. But her mother didn't miss a beat. "Shared dreams are nice," she said, "but some of us didn't raise our daughters to settle for dreams that don't come with dividends." Nolan laughed out loud. Her father stayed silent, swirling his wine as if it were the only thing of value at the table. And Clara? She laughed again, not as nervous this time. This one felt real. That laugh was the moment something inside me began to shift. Not break, just shift. I had spent weeks preparing this night, spending money I didn't really have, hoping to show them I was enough. I wanted them to see the value in my character, not just my career. I wanted Clara to stand beside me proudly. Instead, she was sitting beside them comfortably. The more they tore me down, the more at home she seemed. As if this dynamic wasn't new to her at all. As if she'd known this would happen. By the time the entrees arrived, I felt like a guest at my own execution. Every smile I forced began to feel like a betrayal to myself. Every nod and polite laugh felt like I was shrinking to fit a mold someone else built. Then, as the waiter cleared the table, her mother set her napkin down with a smug expression and said it out loud. "Well, at least if things don't work out, Clara, you can always say you gave the poor boy a shot." The table fell quiet. A beat of silence. And then Clara burst into laughter. Not awkward laughter. Not unsure laughter. Loud, clear, shameless laughter. That's when I realized I wasn't just disrespected. I was dismissed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw my chair back. I simply reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The ring. I opened it slowly, placed it on the table between us, and said with calm clarity, "Since this seems more like a trial than a celebration, perhaps I should give you all something real to judge me by." Her mother narrowed her eyes. Clara's smile faltered. They didn't realize I had more than a ring in that jacket pocket. I let the box sit in the center of the table like a stone dropped into still water. Nobody moved. Clara stared at it with mild surprise, maybe even anticipation. Her mother tilted her head, unimpressed. "Is this the part where you try to buy approval with shiny things?" she asked. Her tone dripped with derision, and her voice cut through the ambience like broken glass. Nolan snorted, clearly entertained. Clara reached for her wine, lips twitching in amusement, as if this were a show she was enjoying. And I just sat there, completely still, my hands calmly folded in front of me. "I didn't bring that ring to impress you," I said, keeping my voice low and measured. "I brought it because I believed your daughter was someone I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I worked hard for it, every dime, every hour, because I thought that mattered. I thought she would see that." Clara finally looked at me, her smile tightening, almost as if she was irritated I was still trying to speak. Her mother leaned forward with a smirk and said, "Oh, honey, it's cute that you think you're not punching above your weight." I turned toward Clara, hoping, praying for even the smallest sign that she'd push back, that she'd say something. Instead, she laughed again and added, I mean, you were kind of lucky I said yes, right? The table burst into stifled laughter, and I felt like I'd been shoved into freezing water. That was it. The mask had come off. She wasn't just letting the comments slide. She was joining in. For them, I wasn't a partner. I was a project. Something to be measured, mocked, and managed. Her mother took a long sip from her glass and said casually, It's no secret you don't come from our world. Clara has always had suitors from better families, but she insisted, so of course we supported her. Until it became clear what this really was. I leaned back slightly, watching her, not reacting yet. You saw a girl from money and thought, jackpot, she continued. You don't need to speak. It's written all over you. You're a gold digger, and frankly, I've seen worse, but never so bold. The word hit the table like a slap. Clara didn't say a word. Not to correct her mother. Not to defend me. Not to deny what she said. She just glanced sideways, cheeks slightly flushed. Not with embarrassment, but with poorly hidden satisfaction. And I realized then, she didn't laugh because she was nervous. She laughed because she agreed. She laughed because she believed it. And maybe, just maybe, she'd always seen me the way they did. Someone who didn't belong but could be tolerated for entertainment. I inhaled deeply, nodded once, then reached beneath the table and pulled out a plain black folder. No words, no emotion, just movement. I set it beside the ring box. Before I leave, I said, standing up slowly, let me leave you with the receipts. Literally. I opened the folder and began sliding documents across the table. Here's the invoice for the venue, paid in full by me 6 weeks ago. Here's the jeweler's certificate for the custom ring, also paid by me. Here's the transfer slip from when I covered your father's outstanding balance at his club, anonymously, as a favor to Clara. Now the table was silent for a different reason. Clara's father stopped chewing. Her mother's wine glass froze midway to her mouth. Nolan looked over his mother's shoulder, eyes wide. I didn't look at any of them directly. I was done performing. I was done proving myself. I was done hoping they'd see me as anything but a stepping stone or a joke. I spoke as if to the air. I didn't do any of this to earn your respect. I did it for her, because I thought she was worth it. But what I learned tonight is that I was the only one at this table who saw love as a commitment and not a transaction. I turned to Clara, locking eyes with her one last time. You laughed. When they called me a gold digger, you laughed. That told me everything I needed to know. I picked up the ring box, closed it slowly, and slipped it back into my pocket. Then I walked out. I didn't rush. I walked out of that dining room with the kind of calm that makes people nervous. The maitre d' nodded respectfully as I passed, unaware of the storm that had just cracked open upstairs. Behind me, I heard murmurs rise, Clara calling my name, her mother's hushed voice saying something sharp, chairs shifting, but I didn't look back. The night air hit my face like cold truth, crisp and clean after the suffocation I just endured. I stepped onto the rooftop terrace, far enough from the chaos to breathe, but close enough to hear if they followed. They didn't. I stood there for a while, watching the lights of the city pulse below me, the ring still in my jacket like a weight I no longer recognized. I had spent so long trying to prove I was worthy of their world, never realizing I'd never needed to enter it at all. Worth wasn't something they could measure in income or dinner reservations. And it certainly wasn't something they had the power to validate. I had tried to blend into a space that wasn't mine, when I'd built something far more solid on my own. A few minutes later, the restaurant manager came out and approached me gently. Sir, he said, holding a white envelope, the remaining balance for the private dining room has been returned to your card. It seems the party inside decided to leave early. I nodded and took the envelope. He hesitated a second, then added, for what it's worth. I've seen hundreds of these dinners. Yours was the first one where the man paid for everything but left with his dignity, not the bill. He smiled, then left me alone. The next day, my phone exploded. Clara called 7 times. Then her mother, shockingly. Nolan sent me a text. You embarrassed us. Hope it was worth it. And her father, silent, of course. But I didn't answer any of them. I wasn't angry anymore. Just clear. Their world had always been more about status than sincerity, and I had finally stopped trying to audition for a role in a play I never agreed to star in. By the end of the week, something else happened. People who had been at the restaurant, people who saw the incident, who heard what happened, began reaching out. One woman, A local columnist emailed me and said, "If that story is real, I'd love to interview you for a piece on dignity and self-worth." I declined, but thanked her. I wasn't interested in turning the night into a headline. But then something clicked. Maybe the way I carried myself mattered more than I'd thought. Maybe the way I walked away meant something. So I made a decision. I posted a short video on my social media account, just a simple one, no names, no shade. I explained what had happened in principle. I talked about knowing your worth, about walking away when respect isn't on the table, about how silence can be more powerful than argument. The video wasn't flashy. It was just me, standing on my balcony in a hoodie, speaking quietly into the lens. By morning, it had over 200,000 views. Then the emails came in, clients, collaborations, even a sponsorship offer from a luxury brand that said they respected my character. That one dinner, that one night of humiliation, had opened more doors than months of effort ever had. Not because I shouted, but because I didn't break. I went back to the jeweler a week later. He asked if I wanted the ring resized or refunded. I told him neither. "Keep it locked away for now," I said. "The right one will come along. And when she does, she'll laugh with me, not at me." 2 weeks passed before I saw Clara again. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, her hair tied back, makeup subtle, and a look on her face I hadn't seen since the early days, before the money, before the judgment. She stood at my doorstep with a kind of fragility that almost made me soften. Almost. But the moment I opened the door and she said, "Can we talk?" I knew this wasn't about remorse. It was about damage control. She stepped inside like she still belonged there, brushing past me without waiting for permission. I said nothing, just closed the door quietly behind her. She stood in the living room, arms crossed, her eyes scanning the place like she was trying to remember what made her fall for me in the first place. "You embarrassed me," she said finally. "You humiliated my family." Her voice wasn't broken, it was entitled, as if I'd breached some unspoken contract of silence and submission. And just like that, whatever tiny part of me still held onto the idea of her died. I walked over to the coffee table, picked up the black folder from that night, now sealed again, and handed it to her. "Here," I said. "You can have the copies, since you like keeping score." She hesitated, taking it slowly, her expression unreadable. I watched her flip through the receipts, the ring appraisal, the club payment confirmation. Her hand lingered on that last one. "You really paid off my dad's debt?" She asked, more surprised than grateful. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I shrugged. "Because I wasn't trying to impress him. I was trying to protect you from the embarrassment he was too proud to admit was coming." She said nothing, just stood there, folder pressed to her chest, caught between defensiveness and shame. "Clara," I continued, voice calm but final, "you didn't just laugh with him. You stayed silent when I needed you to stand beside me. That dinner wasn't a celebration. It was a test. And you failed." She stepped closer, trying to reach for something, maybe an apology, maybe manipulation. "You don't understand how much pressure I'm under with them," she said. "They expect me to date a certain kind of man. I thought if I eased them into it, they'd come around. And what was I?" I asked. "A charity case? A fixer-upper to be paraded once I was polished enough?" She didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. I stepped back, opened the door behind me, and gestured toward it without raising my voice. "We're done. Not because of what they said, but because of what you didn't." She stood frozen for a moment, then walked out slowly, head low, folder in hand. I closed the door behind her and locked it, not out of anger, but peace. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the stillness, feeling something new in my chest. Not heartbreak, not bitterness, just relief. Word of what happened had already traveled through Clara's circle. I started getting calls, not just from old friends, but from strangers. One woman messaged me saying, "Thank you for showing that walking away isn't weakness." Another said, "My ex's family did the same to me, and I stayed too long. You gave me the courage to leave." I never expected a moment of public humiliation to become a mirror for so many people, but it had, and I wasn't going to waste it. So I doubled down on my business. Focused. Hustled harder. I turned my social media moment into a brand, something rooted in dignity, quiet confidence, and authenticity. Brands started approaching me for partnerships, clients came looking for someone who stood for more than strategy. And through it all, I never once chased closure from Clara. That night was the closure. But the universe? It has a sense of humor. 3 months later, I was invited to an event hosted by one of the clients I landed after that dinner fallout. Rooftop venue. Evening lights. And yes, Clara was there, standing beside another man in a sharp suit, her laugh slightly too loud, her smile slightly too tight. She saw me, and for a second, her gaze lingered. But I didn't approach. I just nodded once, raised my glass to no one in particular, and turned away, because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I had already walked out with everything that mattered, my self-respect. I didn't realize it at the time, but that night at the rooftop restaurant had split my life into two clear halves, who I was before that walkout, and who I became after. In the weeks that followed, everything changed, not in sudden fireworks, but in steady, deliberate waves. For the first time in years, I started choosing myself, not to prove anyone wrong, but to finally live right. I stopped trying to mold myself into what others found acceptable. Instead, I focused on what I found meaningful. And ironically, that's when everything began to align. My freelance business took off in ways I never imagined. The video I'd posted about knowing your worth wasn't just shared, it resonated. Thousands of people messaged me privately with stories that echoed mine. Some had been belittled by partners. Others had in-laws who treated them like placeholders until someone better came along. But the one thing they all had in common was that moment of clarity. The second they realized they didn't have to shrink themselves to be loved. I wasn't just reading those stories. I was living proof of them. By month 4, a podcast invited me to speak on emotional manipulation in relationships. I was hesitant at first. I never saw myself as some guru. But I accepted, and that single episode hit a nerve across the internet. Listeners didn't care that I wasn't a celebrity or a licensed expert. They cared that I was real. That I had walked into a room built to shame me and walked out stronger. A brand that I dreamed of working with reached out soon after and offered a partnership. Not because I had 1 million followers, but because, in their words, your story has weight. And somewhere in the midst of it all, love returned. Her name was Elise. I met her at a friend's small art showcase, low-key, no suits, no reservations, just a handful of people sipping wine and talking about the stories behind paintings. She was standing alone, laughing softly at a watercolor with a fox curled beneath an apple tree. I said something awkward about the symbolism, and instead of brushing me off, she asked, "You always think out loud like that?" We talked for hours that night, about art, travel, philosophy, and strangely, silence. She didn't need me to impress her, and I didn't feel the need to. Elise didn't care what car I drove or which watch I wore. She asked about the first book I ever loved. She laughed at my worst jokes. She didn't flinch when I told her the full story of the engagement dinner. In fact, she said, "Sounds like the best escape you never knew you needed." And she was right. There was a peace in her presence that felt earned, not forced. With her, I didn't feel like I had to earn a seat at the table. I felt like the table was ours to build together. One afternoon, almost a year to the day after the night I left Clara behind, I returned to the jeweler. He greeted me with a knowing smile. "The ring?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not that one. I'd like to start from scratch." This time, I described Elise, not just her appearance, but her essence. We designed a ring that told a different story, not one of recovery, but of rebirth. It wasn't about proving my worth anymore. It was about honoring someone who never asked me to prove anything at all. When I proposed to Elise, there was no rooftop spectacle, no formal dinner, no family to impress or audience to perform for. Just the two of us, in a quiet garden behind a bookstore she loved, with soft music from a street violinist nearby. She said yes before I finished the sentence. And this time, when I walked out of that moment, I didn't just have my dignity. I had my future. You've just heard my story, a journey from being dismissed at my own engagement dinner to reclaiming my dignity and rewriting my future on my own terms. If this story struck a chord with you, if you've ever had to walk away from people who couldn't see your worth, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to this channel for more powerful, real-life inspired stories where respect wins, resilience shines, and self-worth is never negotiable. Your next favorite story is just one click away. Don't miss it.